My folks threw me out. At 17, you'll be crawling back in a month, my mom sneered. My dad shut the door in my face. I was furious. I never turned back. But 9 years later, my phone was buzzing with missed calls. They were pleading for me to answer. I hadn't planned to share this story online. After seeing similar posts here, though, I thought maybe writing it out could help me process. Maybe it'll resonate with someone else dealing with family drama. I don't know. Here's my story. I'm Brady, 26 now. It all began when I was 17, a junior in high school. I wasn't the ideal kid my parents envisioned. Dad worked at a factory and Mom was a front desk clerk. We weren't wealthy, but we got by in our modest town. They had my life mapped out. Earn top grades, attend the state college like Dad, marry a sweet girl from our street, have a couple of kids, live their idea of the perfect life. The issue? I despised school. Not because I lacked smarts, I pulled decent marks when I bothered. But I had undiagnosed ADH, only confirmed later. Sitting through endless lectures on topics I didn't care about was agony. What I loved was hands-on work, crafting things, repairing stuff. At 15, I spent a summer helping our neighbor Judah redo his shed. It was the first time I felt truly skilled. My parents loathed it. Whenever I mentioned a career in construction or a trade, Mom's face would twist like I'd announced plans to become a street performer. Dad would preach about reaching my potential, insisting our kind didn't do manual labor. I think they cared more about optics than my happiness. They wanted a son they could boast about at social gatherings, not one who worked with tools. Tensions simmered for months. I was working part-time at a hardware shop after school, stashing cash because I sensed trouble brewing. My grades dipped. I just stopped trying. Dinners became battlegrounds over college forms, my future, or why I was squandering my life. The final straw hit in April, weeks before graduation. I'd been accepted to the state college. My parents practically wrote the application. But I'd also applied to a construction trade program. It was affordable, brief, and focused on skills I cared about. I got in with a partial scholarship based on a project portfolio I'd built. I broke the news at dinner. Mistake. Dad slammed his knife down, rattling the table. Mom burst into tears, like I'd declared I was terminally ill. The fight that erupted was brutal. Dad called me ungrateful, said I was disrespecting their sacrifices. Mom wailed about her disappointment, wondering where they'd failed me. When I tried explaining why the trade program excited me, Dad cut me off with words that still sting. No son of mine will throw his life away like that. If you're too foolish to see what you're abandoning, maybe you're not the son we raised. I snapped. Yelled that I was done living for their dreams, that I was nearly an adult and could choose my path. That they never heard me out. We all shouted, trading vicious barbs I regret. They said worse. Finally, Dad ordered me out if I wouldn't follow their rules. I think he thought I'd cave. I didn't. I stormed upstairs, grabbed the go bag I'd prepped, call it intuition, and crammed in clothes, my laptop, and $1,200 I'd saved. I'd already gathered my birth certificate and social security card. Thank God for my foresight. When I came down with my bags, my parents looked stunned, like they didn't expect me to follow through. Mom started, "You're making a terrible mistake. You're 17. You don't know how cruel the world is." Her smirk crushed something in me. Dad stood silent by the door. As I left, he slammed it shut without a glance. I stood on the lawn, dazed. It started drizzling, which felt cinematic. I thought, this is some melodramatic nonsense right here. Then I called my buddy Corey, whose parents were kind. Those first days blurred together. Corey's folks let me sleep on their sofa, but it wasn't a long-term fix. I was still in school, scrambling to graduate while sorting out housing, food, and survival. I couldn't concentrate. I'd have panic attacks in the school restroom, realizing I'm homeless. One thing fueled me, raw, defiant rage. No way would I let my parents gloat by returning. Corey's mom helped me apply for emergency aid as an unaccompanied minor. My school counselor, one of the few adults who'd ever listened, guided me through legal emancipation. I picked up extra shifts at my job and added a second gig washing dishes at a diner. The hardest part wasn't the logistics, it was the emotional toll. Seeing peers with loving families, hearing classmates gripe about petty spats with parents who still cared, realizing my parents' actions weren't normal, that most wouldn't abandon their kid over a trade school choice, that their conditional love wasn't how family worked. 3 weeks after I left, Mom texted, not to check on me, but to say I could return if I apologized and accepted their terms. I ignored it. A week later, Dad left a voicemail echoing her. They were so sure I'd fail, they were waiting for my surrender. I graduated high school from Corey's couch. My parents showed up at the ceremony, probably to save face. They approached me after, but I walked off. I had nothing to say. By June, I'd saved enough for a rundown apartment with 2 roommates. It was a pit, but it was mine. I started the trade program, using my scholarship and working nearly full-time to cover costs. It was grueling. But every time I wanted to quit, I'd picture Mom's smirk and Dad's slammed door, and I'd push on. That first year alone was the toughest thing I've faced. Lonely, terrified, bone-tired. Some nights I sobbed, missing even my messed-up family. Some mornings I couldn't move, but I got up every time. And I never crawled back, not in a month, not ever. This is long, so I'll post part 2 tomorrow if anyone cares. That's when things started shifting, but it was still a grind. Thanks for the feedback on my post. I didn't expect so many to connect with it. Picking up where I left off, those first months alone were a nightmare, no lie. After staying at Corey's for a bit, I found a grimy apartment with 2 guys, Marcus and Tyler. Marcus worked nights, so we rarely crossed paths. Tyler, I'm pretty sure, was into some shady stuff, but he paid rent and kept to himself, so I didn't care. The place was a disaster. Cockroaches scattered when you flipped the kitchen switch. The shower would turn Arctic mid-wash, leaving you cursing with soap in your eyes. The walls were so thin I knew our neighbor's entire love life. But it was my space. No one could boot me out if I paid my share. I was juggling 2 dead-end jobs, hardware store evenings and diner weekends. With trade school, I was running on 4 hours of sleep. My meals were ramen, eggs, and whatever scraps I could grab from the diner. I dropped 20 pounds, probably looked half dead. Seeing Instagram posts of kids my age at college parties or on family trips hit hard while I debated skipping laundry to save bus fare. My parents reached out sporadically, always with the same vibe. When would I stop this rebellion and come home, accept their help, follow their blueprint? They never asked if I was surviving. Like, your 17-year-old son is in a bug-infested dump. Maybe check if he's eating? Nope. Just waiting for me to admit defeat. 3 months in, Dad showed up at the hardware store. A coworker tipped me off about some guy in slacks asking for me. I spotted him by the paint aisle, looking awkward amid the tools. I hid in the back until he left, watched him linger in the parking lot for 15 minutes before driving off. He never returned. Things shifted around month 4. A regular at the store, Santiago, was always buying supplies for projects. One day, he needed specific pipe fittings, and I not only found them but sketched how to install them. Impressed, he revealed he ran a renovation business, kitchens, bathrooms mostly. He said I had skills and offered me side gigs. The pay beat the store, and it tied to my trade school lessons. It felt like my first real win. Santiago was the opposite of Dad. He valued hands-on work, took pride in it. He'd pause mid-job to teach me tricks, like how to align a tile or why one method outshone another. For the first time, someone saw me, not their version of me. At the 6-month mark, my parents switched tactics. Mom texted that she missed me. Dad sent a message offering to compromise on my education if I moved back. It just reignited my anger. Were they serious, expecting me to ditch my independence for their half-hearted concessions? No thanks. I finished my first trade school year with solid grades. Turns out I wasn't foolish. I just needed a subject I cared about. Santiago gave me bigger jobs, better wages. I left the Roach Palace for a slightly less awful place with one roommate, Aiden, a nursing student as broke as me, but at least clean. By 19, I earned my first certification and was making decent cash. Not flashy, but enough for groceries and bills with a little left over. Santiago referred me for weekend gigs, small fixes, installations. I was building a name, a network. Working in clients' homes showed me how families should function. I'd be wiring a lamp, hearing parents cheer their kids' C-plus grades or hugging them for no reason. I'd see walls covered with photos, trips, graduations, candid moments, normal families that argued but loved unconditionally. It highlighted how toxic my own had been. When I was nearly 20, Mom showed up at my place unannounced. No clue how she got my address, probably a shared contact. She looked older, worn. I let her in, unsure what else to do. It was painfully awkward. She scanned my apartment with a look. Not outright scorn, but like she was mentally noting how my life fell short of her vision. She asked shallow questions about my work, my life. Then came the real motive. Dad had been passed over for a raise, and money was tight. Could I chip in? I laughed, stunned by their nerve. 2 years ago, they'd tossed me out, predicted my failure, and now they wanted my help? I said I was still scraping by and had nothing to spare. She left, visibly irritated, like I'd flunked some moral exam. She didn't say she was proud of me for surviving alone. That visit triggered a rough patch. I questioned myself. Was I too cold for keeping them distant? Too stubborn? But then I'd recall their treatment, their lack of remorse, and the anger returned. Aiden noticed my mood and introduced me to his friend Lucy, a psych major. She became a close confidant, helping me see my parents' conditional love as emotional abuse. Her insights eased my anger and started my healing. By 21, I got my own place. A small one-bedroom, nothing special, but mine. No roommates, no parents. The day I moved in, I sat on my thrift store couch and wept. At 17, I never imagined I'd make it this far. Santiago offered me steady work with benefits, health insurance, a first since leaving home. It was a huge nod to my reliability. It meant more than any parental approval ever had. My parents kept trying to reconnect, but always on their terms. They'd invite me to holidays, then snipe at my choices. They'd offer help I never took, always with strings. Every encounter left me exhausted and resentful. I cut contact to occasional texts and maybe one yearly visit. What they never grasped was that I'd built a good life. It wasn't their dream, but it worked. I loved my job, paid my way, and had friends who valued me. I'd created something real, mine alone. By 23, I had more certifications and was Santiago's lead for certain projects. We clicked, and he hinted at bigger roles ahead. That's also when I met Lydia. Santiago sent me to fix her apartment's plumbing. She was sharp, witty, and called out my nonsense. We started dating, and I opened up about my past, family and all. Instead of bolting, she understood. Her own parents had their flaws, though less severe. When my parents learned I was serious with someone, they suddenly wanted back in. They followed me on Instagram after years of silence, demanded to meet her, and played happy family. I kept them at bay. Lydia didn't need their drama. 4 years after being kicked out, I had stability, my own place, a solid relationship, and a life on my terms. My parents' prediction of failure couldn't have been more off. But the story doesn't end there. Just when I thought I'd escaped their shadow, things got messy in ways I never expected. I'll post part 3 tomorrow. That's when things shift for me and my parents in surprising ways. Hey, thanks for following my story. The support means a ton. So by 24, life had found a groove that felt almost ordinary. I'd been hopping between jobs, gaining skills, and saving what I could. Nothing fancy, just steady progress. My apartment was a cramped studio with a kitchen barely big enough for a toaster and fridge. But it was mine. No roommates, no parents, just me and my thrift shop furniture. One night, scrolling Facebook, yeah, I know, old school, I got a notification. My cousin Madison tagged me in a photo from a family event I wasn't invited to. I glanced at it, then froze. My parents were in the shot. Mom had her fake smile, the one I knew too well. Dad was mid-story, probably recycling one of his go-to tales. But on the table beside them, a framed photo of me from my high school graduation. What the hell? These people kicked me out, barely contacted me unless they needed something, and now they're showcasing my picture like we're a cozy family? I called Madison. She said, "Oh, they talk about you constantly, saying how proud they are." The nerve floored me. They were crafting a fantasy where they hadn't bet I'd fail. Around then, I met Lydia. Not some grand rom-com moment. We were stuck in a slow Target line, griping about glitchy self-checkouts. Her unfiltered humor hooked me. We swapped Instagrams, started texting, and it flowed. On our third date, we talked family. I spilled my story, bracing for pity. Instead, she shared how her stepdad had a controlling streak. Not as bad, but similar. She got it. We talked until 3 a.m., and I felt unburdened, like my past wasn't a shameful secret. A few months into dating, my water heater exploded. I came home to a flooded bathroom, shut off the water, and showered at the gym for days while my landlord dragged his feet. Lydia offered her place, but I hesitated. My hard-won independence was tough to loosen. Then Corey, my high school friend, got engaged, and I was invited to his wedding. I hadn't seen most of these people in years and worried they'd judge me, the dropout, the runaway. But with Lydia there, everyone was chill. They asked about my work, seemed genuinely curious, no shade about skipping college. Corey's mom, who'd housed me post-kickout, pulled me aside. She said my parents had cornered her at the store, quizzing her about my life, where I lived, what I did, how much I earned. That last bit raised red flags. Sure enough, a week later, Mom texted, "Brady, we're hosting a small Memorial Day barbecue. We'd love for you to come. Bring your friend if you want." Friend, not girlfriend. Like she couldn't admit Lydia mattered. The timing, post-financial probing, screamed ulterior motive. Lydia read the text and smirked. "They want something." I went anyway, partly curious, partly chasing closure. Lydia tagged along, joking, "This screams train wreck." Walking into that house was eerie. Same decor, same photos, now including my graduation pic, same cloying air freshener that always sparked headaches. But I felt like a stranger, not a son. The small barbecue was just my parents, aunt, uncle, and dad's co-worker Judah with his wife. Everyone acted like I'd just been away at camp, not disowned. I braced for the catch. It came post-dinner. Dad pulled me into his office, a room I'd needed permission to enter as a kid. He rambled about the economy, tough times, then admitted he'd been laid off after 27 years, replaced by a young grad willing to work cheap. The irony, after pushing college on me, he resented degree holders, was rich. He didn't ask for cash outright, but kept hinting at their rough patch and how family should rally. I thought of that rainy night, Mom's smirk, her certainty I'd beg. I said I'd consider it, dodging a blow-up. Lydia and I left soon after. In the car, she quipped, "That was the most passive-aggressive meal I've ever endured." Mom's texts ramped up after. How was I? Had I thought about Dad's chat? Did I want their old sofa since they were renovating? Read, selling stuff. Meanwhile, my life was climbing. I landed a stable job with benefits. Lydia and I discussed moving in together. My studio was a shoebox, and her roommate was insufferable. Then came the Facebook post that flipped everything. Mom wrote a melodramatic essay about hardship and faith during unemployment, clearly fishing for pity. The kicker? The last paragraph. "We're so grateful for our son Brady's support in this challenge. Family is everything. I nearly spat out my coffee. I hadn't promised a cent, hadn't agreed to help. Yet she was claiming I was bankrolling them? Comments praised my loyalty. I called her, furious, demanding an explanation. She played innocent, saying she meant emotional support, and others misread it. Bulletin. She was cornering me publicly to guilt me into paying. That night, Lydia caught me crunching numbers, seeing if I could help without tanking my life. She asked, "What would you tell a friend in your shoes?" It hit hard. If someone said their parents ditched them at 17, only called when they needed cash, and now expected a bailout, I'd say they owed nothing. So I texted Mom. I wouldn't be funding them. Their situation sucked, but I was still rebuilding from being tossed out. I sent links to job and aid resources I'd used years ago. Her reply, a curt, "Okay." Then 3 weeks of silence, until yesterday when my phone lit up. Calls, texts, voicemails from parents, relatives, everyone. Apparently, Dad still had no job, and they faced foreclosure. Somehow I was supposed to fix it. My aunt's voicemail urged me to be the man your father made you. I laughed, darkly, at the irony. Lydia and I talked late about boundaries, duty, and family. About forgiving versus forgetting. About what I could stomach emotionally and financially. I'm still unsure what I'll do. Part of me wants to help. They're my parents. Part remembers that lawn, Mom's smug prediction of my failure. Now, the tables have turned in ways none of us foresaw. I'm meeting them tomorrow, solo, at a cafe, neutral ground. I have terms and boundaries if I help. Life's strange. 9 years ago, they bet I'd crash without them. Now they're the ones leaning on me. Karma or the universe's sick joke? I'll update after the meeting. Thanks for reading and for the support. So, I left you hanging yesterday, the day before a huge investor pitch Mom called frantically. I ignored it, too swamped with prep, but she called 5 times. Then my aunt. Then my cousin. Something was up. When I answered, Mom was sobbing, barely coherent. She finally explained, "Dad got laid off again, worse this time. They were 3 months behind on their mortgage, their car broke down, and they'd received an eviction notice, 2 weeks to pay or lose the house." I sat in my office staring at my wall of certifications and awards, feeling irritated. After 9 years, they still expected me to swoop in and save them. And the timing, right before my career's biggest moment, was awful. I told Mom I'd call back, hung up, and zoned out. Lydia walked in, saw my face, and I spilled everything. She didn't dictate my choice, just asked how I wanted to handle it. Classic Lydia, why I love her. I decided to tackle my parents' post-pitch, one fire at a time. I turned off my phone, nailed my prep, and the meeting crushed it. The investors loved my work and vision. They grilled me, but I was ready. By the end, they were eyeing not just this project, but future ones. It was the payoff for every struggle since that rainy night at 17. When I powered my phone back on, I had 27 missed calls, not just from my parents, but aunts, uncles, cousins, even distant acquaintances. Voicemail was maxed. Facebook messages piled up. Mom had rallied the whole family to pressure me into bailing them out. Driving home, I felt a mix of pride from the pitch, fury at their tactics, and a nagging sense of duty I couldn't shake. Lydia was on the couch with her laptop, wearing a "you won't believe this" look. Mom had posted another dramatic Facebook rant about losing their home and how some people forgot family loyalty. She didn't name me, but everyone knew. Relatives commented, "Brady'll step up," and "family first." Reading those posts, my anger surged. They were shaming me into paying after all they'd done. I decided enough was enough. No more vague boundaries or strained visits. It was time to fix this or end it. I texted my parents to meet at their house tomorrow, just us and 9 years of baggage. I barely slept, rehearsing what I'd say, imagining their responses. Lydia held me, reminding me I had a real family now, her, our friends, those who'd shown up for me. I drove to their place the next morning, oddly calm. Their street looked the same, but their house seemed smaller, worn. Paint chipped, grass overgrown, Mom's old flower beds choked with weeds, a mirror of their decline. Dad opened the door, looking older, frailer, shoulders hunched like he bore the world. He nodded silently, letting me in. The house was a mess, cluttered, dusty, with that stale smell of neglect. Mom sat at the kitchen table, eyes puffy. She launched into, "Thank God you're here. We knew you'd save us," before I could speak. I stopped her, told them to sit. For once, I'd talk, and they'd listen. I unloaded everything. How they'd cast me out for wanting my own path. How they'd bet I'd fail in a month. How they only reached out when they needed me, never apologizing for their wrongs. Dad tried cutting in with excuses. They meant well, I was defiant, they'd given me everything. I raised a hand and continued. I described those first months, couch surfing, multiple jobs, crying from loneliness, how I'd learned to adult alone because their love came with strings. Mom sobbed, saying they'd erred but were still family, and family sticks together. I snapped, asking where that loyalty was when I was 17 and homeless. Pointed out they only remembered family when they needed my wallet, not when I needed their support. We went in circles. They'd half apologize, then justify or blame me. Textbook manipulation. Finally, I laid out my terms. I'd cover their foreclosure this once, but they had to downsize to something affordable. I'd cover their foreclosure this once, but they had to downsize to something affordable. They'd delete that guilt-tripping Facebook post and clarify they were handling their finances privately. If they wanted any future relationship, we'd do family therapy, not for reunion, but for honest talk and firm boundaries. They had to respect my life, my relationship, my choices. Any support, emotional, financial, hinged on that. I braced for pushback, guilt trips, drama. But Dad looked broken, like he'd run out of moves. Mom was unreadable, her face a mix of resentment and defeat. Thank you for watching Story. Please subscribe and hit the notification bell for more real-life stories.